One of the big challenges I find is that organizations hire a coach because they want somebody fixed. And that's a tough place to be. And that's a really tough place to fix somebody. So our advice is always, how do we help this person develop and grow? Do they have the skills? Do they have the motivation to do what's necessary? If somebody comes into the space and wants to do the work, then I think that's really powerful. If somebody is told you have a coach because we're trying to fix you, that's really challenging. I think that's really, really challenging. So I prefer not to engage in those, and only once I've had a conversation. And by the way, when I have a conversation with a client, it's two ways to say, do you want to work with me and do I want to work with you? It's not a one-way thing. It's a case of this has to be a trusting relationship, an adult-to-adult relationship where what needs to be said can be said, and the person's interested in their own development. If they're not, then it's not our place to try and evoke that in any way. It's up to them if they want to step into the place. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. The other challenge is that people are looking for short-term instant results. And I've come to learn, Manfred Coetzee says this best, where he says human beings are complex and paradoxical. So if you have that in the mix, quick fixes don't work. And human development takes time. It's not a cognitive thing, it's a biological thing. So I can get the insights, but I really need to embody them over time. And if I can do that well, then we can make shifts. And so often, many of the coaching assignments are 6 sessions, and they're expecting miracles in 6 sessions, where it's going to take slightly longer than that. So those are some of the challenges of looking at the corporate desire for a quick fix against what's possible. What we know is that the change takes place in biological time, not in cognitive time. People have to adapt and adopt new habits, and you can't do that just in your head. You can't make the change in your head. You have to make a change physically, because so often the responses that we have are subconscious. They are ingrained from previous experiences. And so getting people to operate differently, we need to shift their mindset and then to adopt new practices and new habits to make the change. And so sometimes organizations will not allow the time for that to take place. And that typically is a challenge, I think.
Quite often people come to coaching with an issue, and very quickly we can discover that that's actually not the issue. So what we often find is fairly senior folks will come to the work that we do, being very clear in their minds that this is something about a work challenge. It's something related to their work environment and not a personal challenge for them. And it's got nothing to do outside of work. And what we know to be true is that 9 times out of 10, it does come back to that. And it's not really about the environment in the office. It's not really about career. It's about the individual. But we're comfortable in that, and we know that. So we let them discover that for themselves. So I think it's about just being very clear about what some of the assumptions are that people have when it comes to what is coaching. What are they going to get out of this? Overcoming that issue when they've been sent to coaching, and getting them to quickly recognize the value and the benefit that they can gain, and not get hung up on why I'm here and who sent me here and what's the reason behind that.
Is there resistance from people when they're sent?
In some industries, the word coaching has a bad reputation because it was linked to performance management. And so they have that connotation in their head. So there will be, in some organizations and some industries, there'll be a resistance with, well, I'm being managed now. I'm being managed, and the potential I'm being managed out of the business. And so just being aware of that in some industries is going to be very useful, and to put it into the right context, that this is about investment in your development and your growth. This is not about trying to fix you. It's about saying, how do we help you develop to the next level in your career.
I find it fascinating that it's interpreted that way, because coaching isn't cheap either, and it costs a company a lot of money. So if you don't believe in somebody being able to do something, you wouldn't invest their money to develop them and therefore improve their performance, obviously. So changing that mindset from the outset, obviously. So that sort of commitment that you talked about earlier is very important, obviously. When do you see it turning? Is it in the first session? How long are people resistant?
It just depends, and it depends on the contracting that you do up front. So the first meeting typically that we'll have with a client will be a chemistry meeting, and that is to see whether there's trust and whether we want to work together or not. And it's through that we explore how we will work together and what this means. And
chemistry meeting, you call it?
Yeah, we call it a chemistry meeting.
Fantastic, I like it.
So it's do we want to work together? That's the bottom line. Is there enough trust, and do we think we can do the work that we need to do? So when we get that right, then we can start to talk about this is not remedial. And I'm quite overt when I'm speaking to my clients about I don't work on remedial cases. So it's a case of an investment in you. And by the time we finish that first discussion, typically the person is settled down and is comfortable. They may hold some concerns, but as the relationship develops, they see that this is focused on them. It's for their development.
Yeah.
And we're a champion in their corner. So they go, okay, now I'm in. And they dive in. Probably by the end of second meeting, they're done. And they're completely committed to what needs to happen. If they're not, then we'll start to think about, well, is this going to work or not? And we can have that conversation as well. Yeah.
And I think typically when people recognize that, first of all, this is a relationship between them and their coach, and it's a partnership. This is not about one-directional contracting and arrangement. This is a collaboration and a partnership. And secondly, when they recognize, to your point, that the company feels that this person is important enough to them to invest this time and money, because it's both, it's time and money.
Yeah.
Once they recognize that and realize that, I think that changes the dynamic. So it might help them overcome why they were thinking that they are here and being presented into this kind of conversation. So I think once you attend to those two, that certainly gets them more settled. So I think anybody in the world, in any commercial environment, when they recognize that this is an opportunity to help them grow and develop, and yeah, that might mean changing some habits. It might mean realizing certain things that might be impacting and getting in their way. It might have served them well in the past, but isn't now. That's forward thinking. That's motivational. That's something that's looking to the future for their growth and development. I think once they recognize that, they become a lot more settled. And that helps the conversation and the collaboration and the commitment to grow very quickly.